I want you to do something for me for a second. Just, close your eyes. And I want you to conjure up an image of the American West,
Okay.
but not the real complicated history with the treaties and the land rights and the politics. I mean the myth, the movie version that lives in the back of your brain.
Right. We're talking tumbleweeds, high noon, dusty main streets, the whole cinematic package.
Exactly. And if I asked you to put a face to that entire era, the ultimate outlaw, the icon of frontier rebellion, who is the first person that pops into your head?
Oh, it has to be Billy the Kid, without a doubt.
It's always Billy. And I bet you aren't just picturing a name. You are picturing a very, very specific photograph. You know the one.
I do. He's standing there, looking a little scruffy, almost defiant. He's got that battered hat on, a waistcoat that's clearly seen better days.
And he's leaning sort of casually on a Winchester rifle.
That's the one. It is the defining image of that time. It's scrappy, it's unpolished, it has become the visual shorthand for the entire Wild West.
And here is the thing. Here's the aha moment right at the top. That image, the one we have slapped on lunchboxes and posters and history books for over a century, it is a lie.
That is a very heavy way to start, calling the most famous photograph in American history a lie.
But it is. And I don't mean it's a fake. It's a real photo, a real tintype. But the information it gave us, the one specific detail that launched 1,000 legends, including the Paul Newman movie, The Left-Handed Gun, was a technical error.
He wasn't left-handed.
Billy the Kid was not left-handed. The photograph, the technology itself, tricked the entire world for 100 years.
And that deception, that simple technical glitch, is exactly where we are starting our deep dive today. But we aren't just doing a history lesson on an old cowboy photo.
No, we are going way, way deeper. We're looking at a project called Binary Interpretation of Billy the Kid by the digital artist Kenji Kojima. And this source, I have to say, it blew my mind because it takes this dusty piece of 19th century history and moves it through the absolute cutting edge of modern technology.
We are talking about encryption, algorithms, bitwise operations, and the very nature of digital reality itself.
So, it's a journey from the muddy frontier of New Mexico in 1880 straight into what Kojima calls the binary void of the internet.
And the mission here really is to understand the tension between two very different kinds of truth. On the one hand, you have material truth, the physical object, the thing you can hold.
The tintype.
And on the other, you have informational truth, the data that actually describes reality, because as we are going to find out, those two things are rarely, if ever, the same.
So settle in. We're about to deconstruct the most famous outlaw in history, pixel by pixel. But before we get to the code, we have to start with the hardware.
The hardware of history.
The source material calls this first section the tintype era. Now, when I say tintype, I think most people, myself included, just picture old sepia photo. But we need to be really specific here. What exactly is a tintype? Because the way this thing was made is the whole reason we got the history wrong in the first place.
Right. To understand the error, you have to understand the chemistry. In 1880, you didn't have rolls of film like Kodak. You certainly didn't have digital sensors. You had what's called the wet plate collodion process.
Okay. Wet plate collodion.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like something you'd find in a Frankenstein lab.
It basically was. I mean, you have to stop thinking of it as photography as we know it today. It was chemistry performed in the field under immense pressure.
And the tintype itself, or the ferrotype, I think is the technical term.
Correct. Ferrotype. It was an image struck directly onto a thin sheet of blackened iron or steel, not paper.
So it's literally a picture on a piece of metal.
It's a sheet of metal coated with a black Japanning lacquer. And this is where the character of the itinerant photographer comes in. This wasn't a studio artist sitting in a velvet parlor in New York City with perfect lighting.
No, these were pioneers.
They were absolute pioneers. These were guys packing wagons with heavy glass plates, extremely dangerous chemicals, bulky cameras, and then dragging them through the mud and the dust of the frontier.
I read in the notes that the itinerant photographer was basically the visual equivalent of the settler.
That's a fantastic comparison. They were exploring and mapping the visual landscape just as the settlers were exploring the physical one. But imagine the process for a second. You find a subject, say Billy the Kid, standing outside a saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico.
Okay.
You can't just click a button. You have to go into your portable dark room, which was usually just a tent or the dark back of a wagon, and you have to pour this syrupy liquid called collodion evenly across the metal plate.
And collodion is... what exactly? I'm picturing something strange.
It's gun cotton, which is, a key ingredient in smokeless gunpowder dissolved in ether and alcohol.
Molly! Ether. the stuff that knocks you out, and gun cotton, which is literally explosive.
Precisely. It is highly flammable, gives off noxious fumes, and smells absolutely terrible. You pour this sticky explosive syrup on the plate, then you have to dip it in a bath of silver nitrate to make it sensitive to light.
Okay, this sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was. And here's the kicker, the part that gives the process its name. You have to do all of this. Rush the plate into the camera, take the picture, and then rush back to the darkroom to develop it before the plate dries.
So it's a race against the clock. That's why it's called wet plate.
If it dries, the chemical reaction stops, the silver salts crystallize, and the image is gone forever. You have maybe 10-15 minutes total from start to finish.
So when we look at Billy in that famous photo, he's not just posing patiently. He's standing there waiting for a guy who is frantically mixing explosives in a tent 10 yards away.
That's exactly right. It creates a different kind of tension in the image, you know. It's not a casual moment, but that very process is what leads us to the glitch, the one that changed history.
The left-handed thing.
Yes. In modern film photography, you take a picture and it creates a negative image on the film. The light parts are dark, the dark parts are light. Then you take that negative into a darkroom and shine light through it onto photographic paper to create the final positive print.
Right, so there are two steps. And in that second step, the image gets flipped back to normal. Two flips make a right.
Correct. But the tintype is a direct positive. There is no negative. The light from the lens hits the chemically coated metal plate, reacts with the silver, and boom, that's your one and only image. There is no second step to flip it back.
So it's a mirror.
It is optically identical to looking at your reflection in a mirror. Everything on the right side of the subject appears on the left side of the photograph.
So physically, on that day in 1880, Billy the Kid was wearing his Colt Peacemaker on his right hip. He was holding that Winchester 1873 carbine in his right hand. But the camera, because of the direct-to-metal process, flipped it all.
And because nobody in the 1880s, or for that matter in the 1950s, when the myth was being cemented in Hollywood, stopped to think about the specific optical properties of wet plate photography, the world just accepted the visual evidence. Look, his gun is on his left hip. He must be the left-handed gun.
That's just amazing, isn't it? We trusted the technology so implicitly that we literally rewrote the biography of a human being to fit the limitations of the machine that captured him.
That is the core insight of this entire deep dive. Our understanding of American icons is built on the physical limitations of the technology used to capture them. We aren't really looking at Billy the Kid. We are looking at what the wet plate collodion process allowed us to see of him.
And we didn't figure this out for sure until much later.
Well, historians and firearm experts had their suspicions for a long time. The public myth was already set in stone. It wasn't until people started looking really closely at the details, like the loading gate on the Winchester rifle, which is always on the right side of the receiver, that they could prove definitively, wait a minute, that mechanism is on the wrong side of the gun. The photo must be reversed.
But by then, the legend was printed. Paul Newman had already starred in the movie.
Exactly. The lie had already traveled halfway around the world while the truth was still, putting on its boots.
Now, you'd think that knowing the photo is technically wrong would make it less valuable. Like a misprinted stamp, it's an interesting curiosity, but flawed. But no, this specific piece of metal it's incredibly expensive.
This is where we enter the cult of the object. We move from the world of chemistry to the world of economics.
In 2011, that original tintype, that little scratched, reversed, lying piece of steel, sold at auction. Do you know for how much?
I do. An astonishing $2.3 million.
$2.3 million. For a picture that is barely the size of a credit card and gets the single most famous fact about the subject completely wrong.
But that price tag has nothing to do with accuracy. It's all about scarcity. The source material for our dive calls this abnormal greed, which is a pretty strong phrase.
It is. But why abnormal? Greed in the art market isn't exactly a new thing.
I think the word abnormal is used because the value is derived entirely from the fact that it is the only universally authenticated photograph of Billy the Kid. It's not just a photo anymore, it's a relic. It's like a piece of the true cross for the mythology of the American West.
So the collectors, the people paying millions, they don't care about the informational truth, the fact that Billy was right-handed. They only care about the material truth.
Yeah.
That this specific piece of iron was physically in the room with him.
Exactly. The object becomes a financial vessel. It's a way to store wealth. It doesn't matter that the information it conveys is a distortion. It only matters that it's unique. And this obsession with the unique physical object is precisely what our artist, Kenji Kojima, is interrogating.
Right. Let's give it to Kojima. because he looks at this $2.3 million tintype, and he doesn't see a holy relic. He sees a data set that needs to be corrected.
Kenji Kojima's work, Binary Interpretation of Billy the Kid, is so fascinating because he doesn't just, open the image in Photoshop, click flip horizontal and call it a day. He creates an entire system. He built a 3-panel video installation to visualize this conflict between the myth and the reality.
Okay, let's set the stage for the listener. Imagine you're in a gallery. You're looking at a wide screen that's divided into 3 distinct side-by-side squares.
Right. On the left panel, and also in the center panel, you have the historical image, the mirrored version, the one everyone knows, the lie of the left-handed gun.
Okay, so 2 panels showing the myth. What's on the right panel?
On the right panel, you have the corrected image. Kojima has digitally flipped it. So now, for the first time in this kind of meaningful artistic context, you are seeing Billy as he actually stood that day, right-handed, gun on his right hip, the Winchester held correctly.
So you're literally looking at the lie and the truth side by side.
But it's much more than just a spot the difference game. Kojima is building what he calls a cognitive map. I mean, think about how we process information today. We are constantly toggling back and forth. We have the received wisdom, the myths we grew up with, and then we get the new data that contradicts it.
Like finding out George Washington didn't actually have wooden teeth, they were made of something else.
Exactly that. We are constantly flipping these images in our heads, trying to reconcile the old story with the new facts. Kojima is just externalizing that internal process. He's showing us visually the friction between the comfortable legend and the corrected, sometimes uncomfortable, reality.
And he does something really subtle with the quality of the images, right? Something with the pixels. They aren't all the same size across the 3 panels.
This is one of those details that just makes you realize how brilliant this artist is. In the installation, the 2 side panels, the global myth on the far left and the corrected truth on the far right, have pixels that are 4 times larger than the pixels in the center panel.
So the center image is sharper, more detailed, and the side images are blockier, less defined.
Relatively, yes. And the metaphor here is powerful. The center panel represents our desire for intimacy, for authenticity. When we look at a historical photo, what do? We want to zoom in. We want to see the scruff on his chin. We want to look into his eyes and see the soul of the outlaw. We crave high-resolution humanity.
But the side panels, with their bigger pixels.
The side panels represent the icon. As Billy the Kid travels through the network, as his image is copied, shared, and he becomes a legend, a movie character, a symbol on a t-shirt, he loses resolution. He becomes abstract.
He becomes a meme.
Perfectly put. He becomes a meme, a symbol. And symbols are, by nature, low resolution. It's so easy to project your own ideas about rebellion or freedom onto a blocky, low-res image. It's much harder to do that with a high-res, complex, flawed human being staring back at you.
That's a really powerful idea. The more famous you get, the lower your resolution becomes in the public consciousness. You stop being a person and you just start being a collection of pixels that represent rebellion or outlaw.
That's what Kojima calls the distance of history. We lose the nuance of the man, but we gain the power of the legend, and the legend is always, always low res.
Okay, so we have these 3 images, the myth, the intimate center, and the corrected reality. But Kojima doesn't just let them sit there on the screen. He starts applying what the source calls the mathematics of history.
This is where we leave the 19th century darkroom and enter the 21st century encryption lab. Kojima decides to encrypt the image of Billy the Kid using a technique called the one-time pad, or OTP.
Now, I hear encryption and I immediately think of, passwords for my bank account, or maybe the Enigma machine from World War II. But the source material calls the one-time pad the pinnacle of security. Is it really that special?
It is the white whale of cryptography. In theory and in practice, if it's done correctly, the one-time pad is mathematically provably unbreakable.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Unbreakable is a huge word. We live in an age of supercomputers, of quantum computing on the horizon, of AI. Surely if you throw enough processing power at something, you can crack any code.
That's the common intuition, right? That every code is just a very hard puzzle waiting for a fast enough computer to solve it. But the one-time pad is different because of how it works. It doesn't rely on a complex but ultimately discoverable pattern.
Most codes use a pattern.
Almost all of them, yes. If I use a simple substitution cipher like A equals 1, B equals 2, there's an obvious pattern. Even incredibly complex modern encryption like RSA relies on the mathematical difficulty of factoring huge prime numbers. It's ridiculously hard, but it's a solvable math problem. a powerful enough computer can eventually crunch it.
So how does the one-time pad get around the supercomputer?
By using perfect randomness, imagine you have your message, in this case, the binary data of the Billy the Kid photo, all the ones and zeros, and then you have key. The key is a stream of truly random numbers that is the exact same length as the message.
Okay, so if the photo is 1,000,000 bits of data, the key is also 1,000,000 random bits.
Exactly. You then combine the message with the key using a simple process called an XOR operation. We don't need to get into the Boolean algebra, but the point is, you are fundamentally mixing your meaningful message with pure patternless noise.
And because the key is random.
The output is also perfectly random. The encrypted message is pure digital static. It has no discernible pattern.
But hold on. If I'm a hacker, a code breaker, and I intercept that static, can I just start guessing keys until one of them works?
But that's the genius of it. You can guess a key. But because the original key was random, every possible decryption is equally probable. If you try to brute force it, one key you guess might decrypt the noise and show you the image of Billy the Kid. But another equally valid key might decrypt the exact same static and show you the Mona Lisa. And a third key will decrypt it into a page from Shakespeare.
Oh, I see. The math has no way of telling you which of the infinite possible answers is the right answer.
Precisely. Without the original one-time use key, the encrypted data is mathematically indistinguishable from random static. There is no pattern, no foothold for the computer to latch onto. It is perfect secrecy.
So Kojima applies this unbreakable spy-level encryption to the pixels of Billy the Kid. What does that actually look like on the screen in his artwork?
It's genuinely haunting to watch. In the first video of the series, you watch that sharp, high-resolution center image, the one where we wanted to see his soul, and it literally dissolves. It doesn't just blur or fade out. It is mathematically randomized, pixel by pixel, into pure digital snow.
Like an old television set on a dead channel. White noise.
Exactly like that. Kojima is visually turning information into entropy.
Entropy. That's a physics term, right? The measure of disorder in a system.
It is. The second law of thermodynamics basically says that over time, any closed system tends toward maximum